Welcome to the recording of Sprout Lab's How to Support Managers to Become Learning Leaders webinar. This isn't a live recording. What I do is grab the bits of me talking and also do a summary about interactive activities as well. Our webinars are quite interactive experiences, and we find that if we record the live events, people are less likely to participate in those. But over time, there's been so much great interaction happening. I'm starting to actually try to summarize what some of the things happened on the whiteboard as well. This is one of our half-an-hour webinars, so it's quite short. And because the interaction does take a little bit of time, it actually does take the recordings to take a little bit less than that as well. So if you hear me do some sort of shuffling around with bits of paper, that's me actually getting back the notes and the screen grabs of people actually doing the whiteboard activities. Cool. So we started the session with an interactive activity, which was about what learning leaders do. And this is sort of, the word learning leaders was in the title. And it's a word that I sort of, during a workshop where we were working through a blueprint for an organization, I coined the term and started using the term to sort of talk about how the role of line managers was going to change during that sort of more strategic approach to learning in that particular organization. Found that it's actually a really nice term that resonates with people really well, and that's why I've kept on using it. So some of the things that we came back through and came up on the whiteboard were things like assisting their teams to develop in terms of what learning leaders do, promoting an empowerment of individuals, really nice thing about encouraging people to learn and fail, and also showing that learning is continuous. Helping people develop and grow was another one of the statements. Encouraging social learning through greater collaboration, embracing the 70-20-10 model, and constantly extending themselves to learn and encourage the team to learn to develop further, and discovering new things for themselves. So what was really interesting, and it came through a couple of times during the webinar in the whiteboard activities, that it wasn't just about developing team. It was also about a learning leader actually being in a spot where they were role modeling continuous learning, so that they're actually being the change they wanted to see in the world. So I think that was a really powerful sentiment that came through as well. Building safe and effective learning environments, and also encouraging learning as a way of being. The other nice thing I'll just end on, which I think was a really nice sentiment from someone, that they're not necessarily managers, but then it might be someone who's actually always encourages the application and sharing of new knowledge. So they might not necessarily have to be a line manager. And I think that was a really nice sentiment as well. So on to the next learning activity. And as you can see, I did that classic thing of starting with some activities before I start ranting. And really, the things that came through about what stops managers from being learning leaders were things like bureaucracy, expectations that they didn't need to be involved in learning, and we've got it a couple of times on the whiteboard, things like time constraints, but also people not feeling comfortable as well about the role of being coaching and learning, and just people not having the coaching and development skills, and yeah, operational pressures. And the other nice one I'll just end on is, I think it was possibly from that same person who might have talked about learning leaders not necessarily having to be managers. That's sometimes what stops people from taking a really active role in learning is their actual own experiences in the past around how it's worked or not worked for them. With our 70-20-10 example webinars, quite often what we do is look at a case study. This is a case study from an organisation Sprout Labs has worked with for a number of years. It's from IP Australia. IP Australia looks after and issues intellectual property rights in Australia. So essentially, if someone has a new idea and wants to patent something, they go to IP Australia to register that, and they have a group of people who are called patent examiners who check to make sure that that meets the innovation and legal requirements for that. Essentially, what happens is people come into IP Australia with their technical skills, they're scientists and engineers, and then they need to be trained in the legal aspects of their role. It's quite a sort of complex set of work and complex sets of skills, and they often need to deal with lots of ambiguity. People have different opinions. These quite often areas to do with grey areas of legalities and different understandings of how things work. So it's sort of both a really sort of high technical skill, but it's got this grey ambiguity to it as well. That's a real challenge. The stage one of our involvement and part of this case study was a regional patent examiner training program. This was a program, and still is a program, that's delivering training across the Southeast Asian region and into some of Africa as well. So some of the countries involved are Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. So essentially what IP Australia is doing is helping these countries upskill their patent examination skills to an international standard. The program's a blend of self-paced learning, virtual classrooms, and some face-to-face training as well. As we were designing this, we sort of felt like it was really important to make sure there were strong linkages back into the supervisors in each one of the patent offices in each one of the countries. So what we designed was a community of practice. It was really about coming together with a purpose of sharing practice and improving practice across the region. This was really focused on virtual classrooms and discussion topics and discussion boards in Yemen. What really was interesting with this is that was a fairly loose set of engagement from the supervisors, and really for the program to succeed and transfer into the workplace, it really needed a tighter involvement. So what IP Australia did was add some face-to-face learning time in Australia. So I think this is a sort of, and I'll call this almost a classic way of trying to engage managers and supervisors into programs. And the second time we worked with IP Australia was on their inboarding program for their internal people. The work means, and IP Australia is set up so that people can work from anywhere, but before we did this project with them, they're in a spot where they had, and anyone who wanted to work with them had to sort of spend 2 years face-to-face in Canberra before they were actually deemed competent. And that was sometimes a barrier to finding the right set of experts that they needed to actually be able to work with. So the program is competency-based. As I just said, it takes between sort of 12 months to 24 months to become competent as being a patent examiner, and it uses a 70-20-10 learning model. Now, at this moment, we paused for a interactive activity to sort of quickly talk about how competency-based learning systems can help managers to become learning leaders. So some of the things that was really talked about is it actually makes it really clear about what results people need to be doing, defined objectives, and gives a structure. And also that structure doesn't just mean formal learning activity, that can also be about developing competency in different ways. And the word framework was used by a number of people and really makes it into a spot where it sort of gives some structure. Competency-based puts their learning investment into a non-L&D manager's language. It stops it being a tick and box exercise and brings them together. Because it's essentially competency-based is something we all understand. We know what we're talking about when we say we can see someone who's competent normally in a workplace. The program is loosely, and it's quite a complicated layered program, but this is a summary of the model. At the beginning, people work on some worked examples that are online. They have reference material that's in handbooks. They have a coach, which is the role we're about to talk about further. And then they're involved in a learner community that's blended as well. At the beginning, they're involved in some workplace learning activities that they work through their coach with. And then at the later stages, they actually do more live casework. There was really sort of 3 pillars to the support structures that it really helped build a culture of learning around this environment, and really started to help and has helped the coaches involved in the program become more learning leaders. So essentially the first thing was around that word coaching, and you heard me previously and quite deliberately use the word supervisor. It's quite a common word in the area, so we rebranded the role from supervisor to coach. Everyone who's involved in the program goes through a program in coaching skills, and then the GROW model of coaching is becoming more embedded in all conversations over time as well. The coaches come together in a community of practice that's led by a workplace learning leader. That workplace learning leader role is a full-time role. It's actually a role that then means that any one of those coaches, if they have a question about the competency-based system, which is modelled on the VET system in Australia, so it's actually quite complicated, they can actually come to that person for support and be there both and for the pastoral care and to make sure everyone is moving through and become this sort of go-to and expert person. The coaches then also have a guide that provides suggested workplace learning activities and also provides coaching questions. Now this guide is actually on a wiki, so that means that in actual fact the coaches can change it if they need to, add more into it, and be in a spot where they can keep on expanding that as well. Now the interesting thing as well is there's a version of the guide that goes to the trainees, and that also means if a coach isn't completely comfortable with doing some of the activities or having the coaching conversations, and there's a really motivated learner, that the learner can help to drive some of that a bit more as well. Now to talk a little bit about the guide, it's actually got a series of activities. Here's some of them, things like case spotlight, mirroring. That's been possibly one of the ones that has worked the best. Job aids, where essentially there might be a new set of skills and knowledge that a trainee is taking on, and they go through and develop their own job aids for that. Checking each other's reports, checking other examiners' reports as well, and then sort of box sets of examples as well. So some of these we've outlined in our Building Expertise ebook, which is in part of the links to the resources. And over time, we've kept on modifying and keep on using these in different ways in different projects. Coaching questions, and I've just grabbed one example and removed a lot of the technical words, but essentially it's sort of doing a couple of things, asking what's important about the concept and skill and what they're just learning, getting them to reflect on what they've learned, what have they learned, talking them through it, making them articulate, and then also trying to finish with a little bit of meta-analysis and meta-understanding about how the conversation worked. So with these types of sort of questions and structure to conversations, I talk about it in terms of trying to, and a learning leader trying to increase the amount that someone's articulating what they're learning and also reflecting on what they've learned as well. And that those two things can be really powerful shifts in learning culture. Now, before, people hinted at the challenge around time. Not an unusual thing. A couple of solutions we've seen to this problem around time, and one of them comes from medical education and GP training in Pacific, where essentially the GP supervisors need to spend a certain amount of time with their trainees per week in training modes. And what actually happens is that they find, if they've got 2 or 3 trainees, they can actually work with them together, which saves them time. And also, it starts to build more of a sense of group learning as well. So some of the ideas for team-based reflection that we've seen are things like blog or book discussion groups that might run on a month, critiques of projects where people present and talk about what they've been working on, and then people rework those, and then just simple things in team meetings of what did we learn this week, or actually the one that we personally find at Sprout Labs is what wouldn't we do again, because that's also a good way of saying actually we've done something, didn't quite work out the way we wanted to, let's refine that and keep that moving forward. This idea of doing this at a team level gets over some of the problems of that essentially line managers are really busy, They don't always have time to spend time one-on-one with people extensively during the week as well. So we then finish the session on really some other ideas about how to support managers to become leaders, learning leaders. And some of the ideas were providing frameworks, just really encouraging and supporting people. Admin support and resources so that they can focus on coaching. So essentially, there was even one organisation I heard at one stage literally sat down with the L&D people, sat down with each of their managers and said, so what's your barrier to coaching? And then they would list some of their time problems, and the L&D people would sit there and then work with them to figure out, well, do you really need to be doing that? Can you delegate that? Actually, you probably shouldn't have been asked to do that to start with. So they were essentially problem shooting the time involved as well. And the one-on-one meetings and making sure that they're consistent and they're actually measured and putting those into expectation and requirements. And yeah, don't overload them with admin activities, and giving them some freedom to be able to challenge and express ideas and have a bit of curiosity in the workplace. Cool. So thank you for listening to this. I hope you've got some bits and pieces out of it, and you found it interesting. Our next webinar is on how to make social learning work on the 5th of October. Hopefully you can join us.